Hey, this is Dustin from Roland, Canada. I'm here with Long & McQuaid, and today I'm going to be showing you the TR-6S. Now, the TR-6S is our brand new drum machine. It is the little sibling of the TR-8S, which is our flagship 11-channel drum machine. Now, the main differences are that the TR-6S, instead of having 11 tracks, it has 6, and the only other real differences is the connectivity, which we'll get into towards the end of the video. So under the hood, this has the exact same power in terms of sequencing, in terms of sound design. All the different engines, all the different types of sounds and samples are in the 6S as well. So let's jump right in, and we'll talk about first what types of sounds you can get out of and create with the TR-6S. So first off, the layout is very simple. You've got the 6 tracks that we mentioned, and you can see they're denoted bass drum, snare drum, low tom, hand clap, closed hi-hat, and open hi-hat. Now, those aren't rules. Those are just basic layouts. It's a good layout for a basic drum kit. However, you can customize and put any sound on any track. You want 6 kick drums for some reason, you can do that. But, just very important to know that you can customize anything on here however you want, and it's very playable, as you'll see as we get into the video. So first, so we can start hearing what's going on, let's do a very simple sequence. Sequencing to get started on the TR-6S, easiest way is to press the TR rec button, the TR record button, select any of the channels you want, and simply put down some notes on the 16th note grid. Now we're going to start with just a single bar of sequence, so just 16 steps, and we'll expand it afterwards, but let's just start with that one loop just to get ourselves cooking. So put down a couple kick drums here, and let's add one here and here. And we're going to press play. We're going to hear what this sounds like. All right, and as you can hear, I've got a very simple kick sound on there, and that, as a matter of fact, is a 909 kick drum. That's one of the ACB sounds, which I'll explain in just a second. Let's move on and add a snare. All right, very simple. Let's add a couple hi-hats here. All right, and an open hi-hat. All right, very simple kind of beat we got going there now. So what are the sounds that we're using? There are 3 types of sounds that you can create with the TR-6S. 3 types of engines in here to create your sounds, I should say. So what are those? The first one that I briefly mentioned is ACB. Now, what ACB stands for is analog circuit behavior. So that's our own proprietary modeling and circuit modeling of the original analog hardware. So what that means is something like the 909 kick drum, as we're making changes on the 3 knobs on the top here, tune and decay to start, we're not using samples as our sound. This is recreating the original sounds from scratch, behaving and having the same type of groove as the original machines. So what that means is that sometimes instruments interact with themselves and interact with one another in an interesting way in the analog realm. Now that is recreated perfectly here with the TR-6S and other Roland ACB products. So when we're taking a look through our sounds, we're going to see that many of them have a P next to the name. And if we press instrument to take a look at the sounds, that stands for preset, and everything with just a P is an ACB sound. So for this kick, for example, we can take a look through a few different ones, and we'll choose a kick that we can get started with. That 909, got the 808, and you can hear it kind of breathing and interrupting with itself. Now that's how the original 808 would behave. Keep going, we've got a lot of different ACB stuff in here. We've got some modded types of sounds, so a 909, but more extended decay than the original would have. All right, so let's leave it on what we started with, that 909 bass 2. And let's move on to the snare. Now for the snare, let's choose something other than ACB. Let's choose a sample. Now the TR-6S comes loaded with a ton of samples for you to choose from, and you can also load in your user samples, which we'll take a look at a bit later. For now, let's go back to that screen where we press Instrument, and we can see that we're on the snare drum category, and just like before, we can scroll through using the value encoder. 707 snares, a lot of the classics in here. But as we keep moving, we'll see that some of these have a different letters next to the name. And if we keep going, we'll see them with S, and S stands for sample. So let's take a listen to some of the samples that come from the factory TR-6S. Some more realistic type samples. Let's choose this high snare. Very cool, I like that. And you can always be adjusting your sounds using the tune and decay knobs at the top. And as you can hear, when you change the tune of a sample, it's very different from changing the tune of an ACB model. The sample is simply pitched up and down in its entirety, whereas the ACB behaves like those originals. So the tune on the 909 kick is actually adding more of a pitch envelope and more punch. It's not just changing the sample up and down. But if you hear, you've got a very wide range. Now let's keep that a little lower than the default. And then of course we've got our decay, which goes very short to as long as the sample runs for. Awesome, let's keep moving down and creating our kit. Very quickly, go to our hi-hats. Let's take a listen to where we're at. Pick something a little bit more crispy. So for that, I'm gonna take a look at the third type of engine that's in here. So we've seen ACB, we've seen samples. Now, let's take a look at the FM engine. So that's frequency modulation. So that's a brand new engine that we added to the TR-8S recently, and of course, it's in the TR-6S as well. So it uses that FM synthesis to create very interesting drum tones and different types of sounds, and you can take it way further than drums as well. But for this, let's take a look at some hi-hats that are created from that FM engine. So again, we're going to select our closed hi-hat track, press Instrument, and let's just keep moving on until we see something with F next to it. So FM metallic hi-hat. Let's try a different one. There we go, FM hi-hat. As you can hear, we can be customizing the sound the whole time. So we're building a bit of a hybrid kit here with a bunch of different types of engines, really creating our own custom kit from the ground up. All right? Now, one thing I would like to point out is that every single track has much more settings behind it than you would have just with the tune and decay control at the top. And you'll notice that there's a third knob, which we'll get into in just a sec. Now, to really kind of show the capabilities of the TR-6S, let's press Shift and Instrument, and then that's going to take us to the editing screen where we can do more deeper editing of our tones. So right now we're on that 909 kick. Let's take a look. So we've got tune and decay, we've got attack. So let's turn that up a little bit, add a little bit more click at the top. And then as we keep going down, we've got the ability to change the gain of each channel. So what that means is what's the maximum level when we turn up the level fader here. And that's really great for when you're playing live, so if you want to be able to just throw your volume all the way up, you know exactly what volume it's going to be at when you have that fader maxed out. And as we keep moving down, you'll see we can set the pan, reverb and delay send per instrument, LFO. Now the LFO is one LFO per drum kit, but you can assign it to a bunch of different parameters per instrument individually and different depths and things like that. So we won't get too much into that today, but it's a very powerful sound design and sequencing tool. And then finally, at the end of every single track, we have the effects, and effects are individual for every single track. So there are master effects, which we'll get into, but right now let's take a quick look at the different effects that are on each track. So let's have that kick drum running still. And we've got the compressor and drive effect on right now. Let's just take a look. We've got just drive, just compressor, a bunch of utility stuff like transients, isolators, low boost, high boost, filters, bit crushers, saturator, frequency shifter, ring mod, and spread. So we've got a bunch of stuff to work with, but they're not just effects you turn on. Let's take a look. If you press the encoder, move to the right once you've selected your effect, you can really get into changing individual settings on each of those. So on this kick drum, we can change the drive, the high pass frequency going in, the pre-EQ frequency. So you've got a pre and post EQ and a bunch of different drive options in there. So really you can dial that in the way you want. I'm just gonna go back and keep it on the default, which is the compressor plus drive. Let's leave it the way it is, all right? So having an effect on every single track means that you can really dial in each sound individually. So it's much more than just an old school style drum machine. You can really do some cool sound design. And what I want to do is talk about user samples now. So I'm going to go into the low tom track just by pressing low tom, and I'm going to press instrument. And because we were on a preset kit, you can see right now it's set to the 909 tom. But I want to move through the different categories and have something not a tom at all. So far we've kept true to the silk screening on here, so we have a bass drum here, a snare drum here. This low tom, let's make it our own user sample. So you can scroll left and right to look through all the different sounds, but if we hold shift and move left and right, you'll see that we're moving through categories. So snare drums, toms, rim shots, we keep going, percussion, tons and tons of sounds in here. Bass samples, lots and lots of stuff. But if we move all the way to the left, you can see import. Now these are user samples that I have already imported into the TR-6S from the SD card. Now let's choose this one, Big Zen Chord. Now this is just a big chord that I made using our Zenology Pro software, exported it very simply onto the SD card, and now it's here for us to load in. So I'm going to press import. All done now. So now this is on our low tom track. Let's take a listen to just it, and we'll put it on step 4 and take a listen. Right, so nice big long chord here. And of course, let's put in a bunch of steps. We can of course edit the tune and decay. And because it's a sample, you know, we can edit that tune with a wide range. I'm going to calm that down a little bit. Add our drums for reference. That's great. So let's get in to change a few of the more in-depth settings on that. And we'll also take a look at how to use this control knob on the top. So as we know, every track on the TR-6S has its own tune, decay, and this control knob that we can customize. So what can we customize it with? Well, that depends on what type of track you're using. Right now we're using a sample track, so we have a lot of different things to choose from. We'll take a look at an FM track in just a second and see what we can choose from there as well. So to get into that deeper setting, like we did before, let's hold shift and press instrument. And this is the same menu where we found the individual instrument effects. But let's go all the way back to the top, all the way to the left, and take a look at what we can do for this sample track, all right? So we've got the tune and decay like we have on the very top. We already know that. But as we keep moving to the right, we've got a lot to work with. So coarse tune, rate is very neat because it reverses the sample. It goes all the way from 100% forward to 100% backwards. Check this out. Really nice for some cooler kind of effects and sound design there. If we keep moving forward, we've got a spread, which is like a chorusing kind of stereoizer effect. And we keep going, we've got a bit reducer, but I want to keep moving on until we find the filter. So each sample track has its own multi-mode filter. It can be a low pass or a high pass. I want to put a low pass filter on this big chord because it's really open and I want to actually just filter it down a bit. So I'm going to go ahead while we're playing and listening, turning down that filter, adding a bit of resonance, and adjusting the individual filter envelope that we have on just this track. Very cool. So that's got a whole different sound now. And that control knob on the very top, let's take a look at how the quickest way to assign a parameter to that is. So what we're going to do is just hold down kit, because this is a kit setting, and I'm just going to go ahead and turn that control knob. And again, you can do this for every single track, and you'll see as I move it, you can select from any of the different parameters you see on the screen. I want filter cutoff, all right? So let's take a listen. So I've got that nice filter envelope, and I've got manual control of the filter cutoff. So that's great. And we'll take a look at how we can do even more with these knobs as we get into the sequencer briefly. So one last track to use. Let's bring up an FM type sound on this. All right, so we've just got an FM hi-hat, but let's take a look at something that kind of brings out more of that FM vibe, one of the more synth types of sounds. So just like before, let's choose our hand clap channel. We're going to press instrument. I'm going to move over to a category, holding shift, called synth. And you got a bunch of different synth categories to choose from, well, 2, and a ton of different settings in each of those. But what I want to do is go to synth 1, and we're going to choose FM pluck, all right? So we've selected that. Now let's put in a couple notes just to start. Okay, and just like we did with our sample track, we want to assign something to the control knob. Now the FM engine has this really neat parameter called morph. Let's take a look at it in the menu first. Shift and instrument. Let's change that morph parameter. So it's really changing it from a sine wave to more of an FM kind of modulated type sound. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that down an octave as well. Okay, so that's a great parameter, but what we want to do is assign that to the control knob. So just like before, hold down kit, and we're going to move over to morph. So now we can control the FM morph from the control knob here. Very neat. So we've seen that each track has its own individual effect, things like compressors, drives, filters, bit crusher, that kind of stuff. But we do have a master delay and a master reverb, and each track can have a send to that effect with its own amount. So let's take a look at that. I just want to send, let's start with that FM sound we're just working with. Let's send this to a bit of delay and reverb, all right? So I'm going to press shift and instrument. If we keep moving on, we're going to find reverb and delay send. Let's turn up the reverb. It's a bit of a short reverb. We'll take a look at that in a sec. And the delay. Delay is fine for me, right? So you can do this different amount for every single track. But let's take a look at how to actually change what types of reverb and delay we're using. These are master effects, right? So they're going to be part of the kit. So let's hold down shift and press kit. And now we're editing our kit. We're going to move over to the reverb, and here we can select from a couple different types. So Hall 1, Hall 2, plate, or mod. Let's choose the plate reverb. And we can add more time here. That's more like it. Nice long reverb. I'm going to do the same thing for our low tom track, all right? So we're going to go shift and instrument for our low tom, which is our user sample. Nice bit of delay and some reverb. I think I went a little heavy on the reverb for the FM part. Let's turn that down. Nice, so this is starting to shape up into more of a full kind of groove with drums, and we've got some kind of synth parts going on. So one thing that I want to do is just go ahead and make it a bit longer. So we've been working with just 1 bar so far. Obviously we want patterns that are longer than 1 bar. So on the TR-6S you have the ability to have patterns that are up to 8 bars long. And once you have those patterns, you can chain lots of patterns together, but let's focus on one pattern today. And each section of those patterns we refer to as a variation. So you have 8 variations to choose from, 8 variations to program. So if we press the variation button, we can see down here we have A through H. Now, we've just been working with A so far, but let's fill up variation B. And instead of programming that from the ground up, what we want to do is simply be able to copy one variation to the next. So when we're selected on the variation button and we can see A through H, we simply press and hold the copy button, press the variation we want to copy, and then press the variation we want to paste it to. Boom. That's all done. So you'll see that just variation A is highlighted. Now, if I press both at the same time, I can chain them together. And if I press multiple at a time, you can chain those together. Let's just work with A and B for now. So both at the same time. And we are going to add some changes to variation B. So essentially, we're going to keep the first bar the same. Variation B, we're going to add some changes. And I'd like to take this as an opportunity to show you a couple more of the advanced sequencing options that are available on the TR-6S. So we're going to go back to TR Record, and we're still editing variation A. I'm going to change it over to variation B because I want to focus just on B, even though we're playing both in a loop. I'm going to hold down Record and move over to variation B. So now, even if we're playing both and we're hearing A, then B, we know that what we're looking at and what we're editing is variation B. So let's press play and make sure that we're in the kind of vibe that we want. In terms of that, let's make sure we're at the right tempo. Let's turn it up just a little bit, pressing in the tempo button. Let's go up to 128. And not only tempo, shuffle really helps us add a bit of vibes. Let's add a little bit of shuffle just for a bit more flavor. We can go pretty extreme with it. A bit too much for me. Let's dial it back to maybe 32, so just a little bit. It's more of a feeling than, it's not that obvious. All right, so now that we're set up with the kind of vibe we want, we're taking a look at variation B. Let's add some more types of changes to variation B, and we're going to use some advanced sequencing. So the first type of advanced sequencing I'd like to show you is the substep. So when we press the substep button here, just says sub, you can see up on the top right, we have options which we can change with the value. So there's three types of substeps and a flam. So substep half, 1/3, and 1/4, that is on one hit, on one step, you can have two notes. So essentially a 30-second note, that's a half. A third, you can have a triplet on one step, and a fourth, you can have 4 notes on one step, so really tight. And then when you move to the flam is more like, it's not mathematical. It's like a drummer just going brap on a snare with 2 sticks. It's really more of a natural kind of sloppy brap. So that's an option as well. But what we want to do is I just want to add some different hits to this snare track. So we're only going to hear it the second time around, all right? And I want to add a substep with a half right at the end on the very last step. So I'm holding sub, I'm going to press that. Let's take a listen. Remember, second time around. Here we go. Right? Nice. So that's a really great way to add a bunch of different types of rhythmic changes to your sequence and really kind of expand it off of just the 16th note grid that you see in front of you. So not only that, but we can also record changes to any of the knobs on the top. Now that also applies to the customizable control knob, right? So first off, what we'd want to do is pick a track that we really want to make an obvious change on. And we're going to make sure that we turn on what's called motion recording, because I'm going to be playing this knob live and it's going to record those motions into the sequencer. So I'm going to go shift and variation, motion, on, right? So now when I turn on instant record, I'm going to be able to record a motion, and I want to change the motion on this track here, the low tom. And right now when I'm in instant play or instant record, I can just play manually any of the tracks from the pads down here. So I want to record some of those types of changes. So I'm going to press play and just go off on that for a second, just for 2 bars, and we'll hear the change. You hear that? Right? So that was recorded directly into the sequencer, right? And if we take a look at the individual steps, which is very important, just like we were adding substeps, We're really drilling down to see what's going on each step. If we hold down any of the steps, we can see on the menu, and we can scroll through, the different settings for these control knobs. So we got tune, decay, and what we just changed was filter cutoff. So you can see that every single step has a different filter cutoff setting that I recorded in manually, but I can go in there and change it after if I wanted. So another great way to use that per step motion recording is with our little snare trick that we did there. On the second bar, I'm just going to go ahead because one of the other options is velocity. I'm going to turn one of those velocities way down, so that little roll before that snare is going to be a lot softer. So let's take a listen to the snare and the movement that we just did on that user sample track. A little too low. So you hear that? Let's add another one here. Really build up. There we go. So you hear that kind of, that little drum roll. Nice. And let's throw everything back in, and we got a good groove going. What's that I just did? I was just playing with the master effect. So that's the final effect available in the TR-6S is the master effect, right? So we saw that we had a master delay and reverb. We've also got one more effect on the very top, which affects everything, which is the MFX and master effect, and we've got a bunch of different options here. So let's just press shift, master effect, and right now it's set to the low pass, high pass. It's like a DJ style dual filter. So to the right is a high pass, to the left is a low pass. Very typical for DJ mixers, but we do have a lot more effects. Let's take a quick look at some of the other effects that are available on the master. Transients, compressors, drives, really drive it up, overdrives, distortions, phasers. And those master effects are really great for transitions when you're moving from one pattern to the next, or you're trying to build up energy, that kind of thing. So that phaser is really neat. We've got flangers and a sideband filter, which is very cool as well. But for today, let's just leave it on the dual filter. So we've got that DJ style filter. And we can punch it in and punch it out with the master effect button at any time. So we know that we have 8 variations to work with in our pattern, but there's a bit of extra stuff we can add. We've got what's called fills. Now this is what it sounds like a drum fill, but what it is really is we've got 2 fills to work with, and they're essentially 2 extra variations that we can just punch in at different times, either manually or automatically based on our settings. Let's take a quick look at how to do that, all right? So there's this fill in button, fill in trigger, and under it we see settings. So let's press shift and fill in. And the auto fill-in will allow us to make it turn on automatically based on a certain amount of bars passing. But we want to just do it manually. So let's leave that off. And then here we select what do we want our fill to be. Do we want it to be fill 1, fill 2, a scatter effect, which we'll get into in a second, or one of the other variations, which can be very useful as well. Let's say we want it to be fill 1, all right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit that fill by holding down TR record and moving over to 1. Instead of A through H, we see 1 and 2, which are fills 1 and 2. So fill 1, I'm just going to manually put in a bunch of snare drums. And on the last step, I'm going to put in 2 substeps. All right, and the last one, the substep, I'm going to make it even faster. So that's our fill, and we're going to hear it in a second when we punch it in, because I have this button set up so when I press it, the fill is going to go in. Let's take a listen. Nice. So I just programmed that just visually, but it's there. I can throw it in whenever I want. And again, you have 2 types of behavior on that button. You can make sure it happens on the next bar at the top. I like to have it so as soon as I hold it down, it punches in that fill. Like that. And of course you can have any instruments on the fill. I just did a quick little snare thing. So let's take a look at that scatter effect as well. So we're really seeing that many more different layers to your sequence we can have set up to bring it to a different level. All right, so if we go shift and setting, remember autofill in, we wanted it fill before, let's put it to scatter. Now we won't get too in-depth into the scatter effect because there are a lot of settings to choose from, but essentially what the scatter effect is doing is chopping up your beat, the audio of it on the output, reversing it, adding a bunch of different types of stuttering effects, and let's take a quick look at what that might sound like on this pattern. And remember, I've got this set up so when I press this button, it punches it in right away, and instead of just putting in a fill, we also have scatter depth on the knob when we hold it down this way. Check it out. All right, so it can get pretty extreme, but there are many different types of scatter settings in the TR-6S for you to explore. Another way to really liven up your sequences, especially live, and get hands-on, is what we call step loop. And the step loop setting, it's got its own button right over here on the left. And essentially what that's doing is allowing you to put your fingers down on any step, hold it down, and it'll loop the sound on that step. So it's not looping the audio at the output like the scatter is kind of messing around with. This is just repeating those steps. So that means that you can make changes while you're holding it to your different sounds, which can be very effective, right? So let's just take a quick listen to that, and then we'll have a play with all of these different types of settings. So the master effect, the step loop, the scatter, all that, and how we can get hands-on with this tiny little machine with a huge amount of sound and sequencing capabilities. So let's press play, grab a step. Not just one step, 2 steps, 3 steps. As many steps as we want. And you see, I was making changes to the snare as I was going. And then we've also got our scatter and our master effect. So getting your TR-6S hooked up with your other equipment is very simple. We've got some quite straightforward connectivity on the back and the front of the unit. So we've got a left and right master output, which are 1/4 inch. That's to connect the audio to your sound card or maybe some guitar pedals, whatever you're into, to really kind of get that going with the rest of your setup. We've also got MIDI in and MIDI out, because you can of course control this via external MIDI, sync it up to your external gear, sequence it from external gear, tons of different options there. We've also got a USB connector on it. Now, the USB connector can run power to the unit, so just a standard 5-volt power charger, that'll work. Whatever you charge your phone with, as long as it's got about 500 milliamps or more, which most do, it'll have no problem powering the TR-8S. Also, of course, the TR-8S is battery powered, so it's great for portability. And even if you've got one of those portable charging bricks, those are really useful to have a couple different pieces of USB gear on the go. Also, over USB, the TR-6S acts as a full sound card. Now, this is pretty common for almost every Roland synthesizer product in the current lineup. So if I hook this up via USB to my computer, it'll be powered by the bus power on the computer, and when you download and install the driver, you'll see many channels available for the input. What you can do is record the master channel, of course, but every individual channel has its own output into your DAW to record and mix down individually, which of course is crucial when you're mixing down drums and mixing down anything for that matter. You'll also be able to output audio from your DAW through the output of the TR-6S. So if you want to do a little gig and you got the TR-6S in your laptop, that's all you need. Send the master out into the PA system. Pretty much all your stuff from your DAW are going to be coming through the output as well. So very powerful there. And then finally, we have the SD card, and the SD card holds your user samples to load into the machine, which then keeps them in RAM, but you can have a ton of user samples on the SD card ready to load in at any time. It's also great for backing up restoring your kits and your patches, doing firmware updates, and of course, sharing kits and patches with other people. So you can just go online, share your kits, and then pop it into your SD card, put it into someone else's TR-6S. Easy as that. Thanks for joining me today to check out the TR-6S. This is available now. Please go check it out at longandmcquaid.com.